Good evening. My name is Katie Hirsch. I'm a curator at the Halsey Institute of Contemporary Art. Tonight's discussion between Tanja Softić and Marian Mazzone is one in a series of in-conversation events that we'll host over the rest of the year for our virtual exhibition, Displacements, Revisitations of Home. Displacements may be experienced at displacements.org. Displacements, Revisitations of Home features the work of 10 artists who were asked to submit work that speaks to their own reflections of the meaning of home. Each artist was paired with a writer who responded to the body of work with an essay. Recordings of all conversation events, including this one, will be available at displacements.org after the fact, as well as archived on the Halsey Institute's Facebook page. We invite you to participate in the Displacements project by visiting the Engage tab on the website. There, you'll find a phone number where you can call to leave a message sharing your own stories of home, as well as a map where you can add your home alongside those of others. On the website, you'll also find a resources tab where you can download a teaching packet that you can complete on your own with children or share with an educator you know. Tonight, I'm pleased to introduce Displacements artist Tanja Softić and her respondent, Dr. Marian Mazzone. Tanja Softić is an artist who works across the media of printmaking, drawing, photography, and book arts to explore questions of cultural belonging, hybridity, and memory. She joins us this evening from Richmond, Virginia. Dr. Marian Mazzone is Associate Professor of Art History at the College of Charleston. She is a specialist in new media and modern contemporary art with extensive travel and research experience in Central and Eastern Europe. She joins us this evening from Charleston, South Carolina. We invite you, the viewers, to ask any questions you have for Tanja or Marian by entering them in the Facebook comments below this video or by emailing halsey@cofc.edu. Many thanks to both of you, Tanja and Marian, for giving us your time this evening. I will go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
Yes, thank you, Katie. And so, Tanja, I'm going to jump right in with a provocative and very open question.
Wow.
To put you on your mettle right away.
Okay.
How would you answer me if I asked you, where's home for you? If I say home to you, what does that mean?
Oh.
See?
It means several places,
Okay.
a number of places, and no place in particular at the same time. And that is something that living in diaspora, being in exile, sort of hands you, that kind of odd vantage point, you know, where you are looking everywhere, but you are not quite sure where you're looking from, where are you standing.
Okay.
That's
so it's sort of a geography thing, and it's also a mental placement kind of thing.
Yes.
Yes. All right.
And to overlap.
And intertwine with one another, right?
Yes, yes.
And this is just something I'm curious about. What keeps you from going back to Sarajevo? You're in diaspora, and that's a difficult condition to be in.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you stay in it? Or is sort of you have to stay in it now?
I wouldn't say that I have to stay in it, but it's been a number of years, and I have built my professional life here. You know, not over there. I have left when I was 23 years old. Obviously, there was a period where there was no going back. It was, you know, not possible. You know, afterwards, after that particular period, you felt kind of uprooted, extracted enough where you have kind of shaken some of the rocks and soil, if you will, and you're already, somewhere, settling in to a degree somewhere else, but not really settling in. But the long story short, my professional life was here, and increasingly my social life, my my human connections, life, my cultural references life, and I do have to admit, I don't know that situation is the same in countries of former Yugoslavia now, but I have studied, I'm an undergraduate of Academy of Fine Arts in Sarajevo, where I would say the faculty of about 50, 2 women that somehow never got promoted from a degree that we could, I guess that would be, equivalent to assistant professor here.
Right.
And so, the message is, loud and clear, so, but, this is not to say that there aren't plenty of women, working in culture in Sarajevo that are still fighting like hell, and sometimes that is the content of their work. But I started teaching after graduate school at Old Dominion University. I started teaching at Rollins College, which is in Florida, in a little town called Winter Park that's been sort of absorbed by the behemoth of Orlando. And I've taught very lovely and productive 8 years there. And then I came to U of R in 2000. So, at that point, there hasn't been much in terms of family left in Sarajevo. There's certainly friends, of course, and so on. And also I did not leave because of war. I did not leave during the war. I left before. And to be perfectly honest, there's a certain distance that having and not having that experience creates among people. Yeah, to give you an example, when I go to Sarajevo, you do this thing where you walk down Ferhadia, which is the main pedestrian area, and there are cafes everywhere and people are sitting outside in the summer. So what you do, you either sit down and, have something, and inevitably somebody, is going to stop by, and they're going to sit down, and then you're going to leave, and then somebody's going to sit down with them and such. And you sort of scan the crowd, whether you're a walker or sitter, for known faces. And I realized that I was doing this thing where I was looking at sort of youngish people in their 20s. And it occurred to me, that is the age when I have left. My years in the middle have happened somewhere else. And, I need to look at the middle-aged people.
It's okay, they're not so bad. But I hear you, especially with this idea of not having had the same experiences that the folks in Sarajevo have had over the last few years. And so
and not having experience of war, obviously the big one, the experience of living through the 3 and some months long siege, and deprivations of it, and the horrors of it, and also just not being there through the immense changes that have happened.
Right.
I have heard on NPR and that I remember hearing the Communist Party of Yugoslavia, this like conference, annual, disbanded itself. It's over.
What?
They don't exist. Okay. questions. The things where, the republics were declaring independence one after another, sort of these, things that we sort of knew somewhere were possible, but they just, the idea was so medieval to those of us who were, it's a little bit like situation here, when we realized, why divide was in the last election, we also realized we are not really contacting each other. We live in our own, bubbles or shooting squads, circular or something.
Right. So I asked about a little bit about this because I know that perhaps some of our viewers will remember the 1990s and seeing what happened to Yugoslavia and hearing about it. But then some of our younger viewers, they won't. And so I hope also that they'll go out and do a little Googling and look at a little bit of history so that they know something about Bosnia and Herzegovina and about Sarajevo and about that place. It's a beautiful city. And it's gorgeous country. And you absolutely show some of it to us in some of the photographs that you base the work that is in the show right now on.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like snippets and parts of what is Sarajevo to you in some ways, when you talk very beautifully about going back and visiting and seeing the buildings, seeing the National History Museum, the Museum of Literature and Performing Arts, where your mother was a curator, so you spent a lot of time in and around that place. And so those places and that memory of those places comes up in your work, I think, very beautifully in those photographic snippets that are kind of enmeshed in those large spreading compositions that are part of your work. And Katie, if you'll scroll down a little bit more on that photographic essay so that people can see, these are pictures that you took on one of your visits back to Sarajevo, kind of showing what the cultural institutions are like, what the state that they are in, and your memories of those places and your kind of experience of those places when you still live there. And then showing us some of the wonderful, both the older Austro-Hungarian architecture and then the modern Tito Yugoslavia architecture like we're seeing here.
Mm-hmm.
And so that registers, I think, very beautifully in these snippets of architectural detail that come into your work. And this is the Lit Museum, particularly Literature Performing Arts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they have I was so impressed when I read, they have the entire manuscript of Ivo Andrić, which is great work. And so it's like, wow, fabulous.
Yeah, and I touched it. I put my hand on it, and it was damp.
Oh no!
It's in the the preservation. Oh, here's a hero of the war. Here's one of the people whom I admire. Nermin Ibrul. He is the conservator in the National Library. And he worked there when the war started, and he worked there during that August, of 93 when they bombed they bombed the library, National Library of Bosnia and Herzegovina, with the incendiary bombs and set it to fire. And he was among the people who were running in because he knew where the most valuable manuscripts, maps and things like that were. And he, along a number of people who were working there, were trying to run in and get just handfuls, heaps of these things and run out with them. That was all that was, left to do. Mm-hmm. And at some point, somebody started saying, get out, the beams are falling, no more books, get out. He turned around for one last look and he realized he thought, oh, I'm hallucinating. I need to get out because I see the silver waterfalls going down the columns. And later somebody explained to him that he was not hallucinating, that was the lead. It was Austro-Hungarian made building that was a moisture seal at that time between the floors. And the heat of the books burning above was melting that lead.
Yeah.
And that is, what was happening. And then he told me that library burned, that for about 3 days, the pieces of charred pages were sort of floating around the city, and that you could catch them with your hand and you still could see the iridescence of ink. You could read them, and then they would of course turn to dust because they were just
Ash.
so and he goes to work every day and repairs what is left there to repair. And a remarkable person. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I want to go back to the work if we can for a minute, Katie, because one of the things I want to talk to you about is the mushrooms, the fungi that you're using. Kind of the role of those in your overall work. Where did those mushrooms come from? What are they doing for you?
Well, I've first of all, Bosnia has quite a bit of mushroom gathering culture, and this is something I've grown up with. And my mother was, avid mushroom hunter, and the thing kind of fell to the wayside in US, different continent, different mushrooms. I just wasn't close to the mountains and woods the way I used to be in Sarajevo. I find them, but I photographed mushrooms. I mean, I have oodles of years and years of pictures of mushrooms from various hikes that I eventually started cutting up and started putting in. When I look at the mushrooms in the forest, there's something startling about their appearance. They jump out at you. They demand attention in this. They look like something stitched, photoshopped into what you're looking at. And then I started, as there's quite a bit of literature and coming out that is very concerned about the trees, the mushrooms, the sort of these underground, almost neural networks that scientists are increasingly finding actually exist, not the unicorns and magic, but things that are pretty close to magic in terms of communication, among different plants. And mushrooms are very, very important part of those communications. And I get very affected, very influenced by this wonderful book by Anat Singh, who's an anthropologist and sociologist. She's, I think, out of University of California in Santa Cruz, and it's called The Mushroom at the End of the World. And it's the study of that's centered around matsutake mushrooms, which is the most expensive, highly prized mushroom in Japan. And except it doesn't grow in Japan anymore. It grows where there's been some kind of a horrible disaster, such as clear cutting of the forest. So Oregon is one of the prime places for hunting of those mushrooms. So she looks at the communities that have developed around the chain of supply to Japan, from Oregon through, Laotian refugees who are often the pickers, to Chinese Luo who are often sellers, to the Japanese wholesalers, and this sort of a whole entrepreneurial structure outside of the capitalist grid, but sort of clinging onto its edges, if you will, that is well, very, very fungal, in its nature. So it's an incredible book. It's such a, it brings so much. So anyway, all of those things combined, I began working with these images that the older I am, the bigger drag of images that take longer and longer to actually arrive at some kind of a finished artwork. So what we are looking at, for example, the photographic image is a photograph of what used to be my kindergarten. An image that I very clearly remember. And those early childhood places, that's where your dreams live. That's where you are, spinning things in your dreams. So anyway, it's the photogravure that I have made maybe 10, 11 years ago in New York with Lothar Osterberg, wonderful photogravure artist. And the images, the plates were there. I loved them. They just seemed to have languished into my studio, leaning against the wall for a while. And then they came back and sort of confronted some other things that were waiting. And there was just something about stitching of this sort of a landscape of what I remember, what I do not, what I embellish. And I felt that the mushrooms were very appropriate objects there. And then I put them there, and as I was starting to work on this series with mushrooms, I'm sitting in the studio, putting these images of mushrooms on, I literally make stickers out of them. They're printed on thin Japanese paper and then put on this archival sticker material. So anyway, I'm giggling and putting these things on and thinking like, okay, I'm done for, I'm crazy, and everybody will see that, soon enough, as soon as they see this. And I look at them and I think, what can I say? They belong. And, it's almost
naturally, yes.
yeah, to my everlasting shock, so they are the part of this, simultaneous working with all this visual and object details that you're kind of carrying with yourself through your life. And stitching these things, to create something else, some kind of a new narrative. Right. That is, anyway.
Yeah. Well, and to me, they're a kind of interesting thing. On one hand, we think of mushrooms as being on decaying things, right? Or
exactly,
right?
And they are. And their role is to help things decay.
Right.
It often, they're toxic mushrooms, of course. They are, there are all sorts of them. But, that's another thing that's so exciting. They're sort of somewhere between living, dying, and, it mediates those two concepts very well.
Right, right. They are living, and they're fascinating shapes and colors and all of these wonderful
Absolutely.
Things. I liked how you described it as they sort of just, they kind of pop up like all of a sudden they, they just were stitched on from some strange place.
Yeah. And, another thing is they're aggregate shapes. They're not these, they're not these sort of a solitary, wrought out singular objects. They're visual powers and is in their, I don't know, collectivity, so to speak. So, which is another, I think,
there's a collectivity, and there's a collectivity, as you mentioned, that goes on underground, a vast collectivity that we only see just a tip.
Exactly. And I happen to I grew up with, my father was a medical doctor and a scientist, and there was a microscope at home.
Yeah.
So those are the things that I think are some of the most exciting stories today. What we are learning about natural world, what we are learning about the relationship of this idea of solitary hunter, for example, as opposed to entire family running after rabbits, really, rather than, one dude hunting a mammoth.
Right.
The stories of, this rhizomatic, the web connections, as opposed to sort of a solitary, unique, kind of individualistic tales, is something that we're hearing more of, and I find it exciting.
Yes. Well, and it's a deep part of that comes to you from kindergarten on, correct? Right? The kind of thinking.
Well, the idea of collectivity.
Yeah, so the use of collectivity, yes.
The idea of some kind of, well, right now, I mean, we are sort of, I don't know, I hope we have reached the rock bottom of the sort of American idea of collectivity, which is, which we could use a bit more of, in combating the pandemic and such.
Yes, we need each other, right? We're not alone.
Yeah.
We're not alone. We're not individuals.
Yeah.
We need each other.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I would like to talk to you a little bit about, as well as your composition, and you mentioned it kind of in passing as you were talking about your way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that things tend to spread out in your compositions. There are no centers, correct? Mm-hmm. We have this kind of spreading, long kind of space in which things kind of coalesce across that space, but mm-hmm. you don't structure them into an orderly composition. And one of the things that helped me understand that better was to read one of your articles, and you talk about thinking about your surface sort of like a theater screen, where you kind of place things, and that screen can kind of move and be pulled, and it's kind of shifting and changing. And of course, for all of us too, as we look at you, we can see behind you on your studio wall that one of your habits now is also to just pin things up on your studio wall. Mm-hmm. Like, work with that as your screen, maybe. Am I getting that right? Am I understanding?
Yeah, those by the way are the series, I call them, I don't know, only half jokingly, plague diaries. That's what I have been doing, both because I'm currently the chair of the Department of Art and Art History here, and as everybody in academia knows, last summer was not really a summer. It was one long preparation and freak out about the upcoming semester, and so the time is first cut short, and then I sort of felt this need to kind of quickly just play with something visual, play with the ideas, play with the visual elements, and sort of let them speak to me in terms of what they're wanting to say. And inevitably they end up, you are commenting on what you're seeing around you, if you will, or what you're thinking about, whether it's happening now or in the past. But it is, I'm a printmaker, if I think of a central discipline of mine, I work on paper, photography, printmaking, drawing, painting, generally artist book, generally it's on paper. And
you write poetry too, right?
Yes, I write poetry as well. And so yeah, it is all happening, you know, on paper. But you know, the core of my art making is, I would say, printmaking, in etching. I would even say, and if you are trying to make a color image in etching, you have to do this process that's called registration, color separation and then registration. So in other words, different colors are going to be on a different plates that then need to be printed, you know, over a template precise enough where they all line up. And so that kind of layering, that kind of technical necessity of breaking your piece into sort of these things that will click together, you know, sort of a way of orchestrating, if you will. That is what makes me a layer maker, you know, and letting each of the layers sort of respond to the previous ones and so on. And to go back to what you were talking about before, about composition that is not about, you know, there's no central image in there. There's no key to the image. It's very keyless image. It's very floaty. My images are, and you know, there's no single protagonist, you know, if you will, and that unsettledness of the image is something that was part of my work for a very long time. And you know, and I believe it's sort of a way of, you know, if you will, poetically visualizing this story of continuously changing life, and you know, the number of lifetimes we go through. Because, you know, I mean, you don't have to be an immigrant from Bosnia or somewhere else in order to, you don't have to be a refugee of war, or you don't have to be in exile with the war to be an immigrant in some fashion. You know, we have all immigrated from somewhere, right?
Right.
We have all immigrated from and immigrated in and so on. You know, the places we live, the marriages, the families, the all kinds of things. And it is in those, I guess I am interested in, you know, those places between the cars and the train, you know, that kind of jiggle dangerously.
You know, those kind of two subway cars that, you know, kind of and sometimes that transition can be tricky, especially when you're carrying that weight of all those images kind of in a trail behind you, right?
It is. And I mean, it results in a lot of rejected stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I have oodles and oodles and drawers of things, because it's, uh-oh, here comes my critic, Simone. And, you know, it's interesting because
I love the tail.
Oh yes, I think she gets excited by voices coming from the computer.
She has to come check it out.
Yes. She tends to do that. Anyway, I've lost the train of thought entirely.
About how much of your work that comes with you, but doesn't necessarily get into a composition. It kind of gets left behind or left out, or.
You know, I sketch to a degree, and my sketches take me somewhere to a degree. And sketches involve drawing and cutting collage and working in Photoshop and then cutting that by hand, you know, sort of all kinds of nutty ways at arriving at an image. And they're very helpful, but what I end up with in the end is not going to be anything like what I've sketched. And at some point you sort of need to let the piece guide you. you know, and you need to respond to what's happening in front of you as you are in this conversation, you know, what the material is saying,
Right.
if you will, what the image is, say what is kind of physical reality of making a piece, you know, telling you, and that always changes the piece. I mean, obviously, if we are conceptual artists, this is one way we need to work, right? You need to, most of the time, I mean, that's the idea, you figure out what needs to happen, and then you go through the steps of executing your piece. You know, that's why we can have performances of John Cage with, you know, very specific directions, you know, stand there for 33 seconds, then, you know, I wouldn't be able to appreciate that work. I wouldn't be able to work that way. I would jump through the window. I wouldn't, I wouldn't know what to do with myself. At some point I have to get away from myself and let the piece itself, you know, sort of get away from it, hopefully not look at it for a while. And then, I apologize. And then, you know, then see it a little bit anew and see where I depart from my own earnest, you know, intention.
Gotcha. You know, there's a wonderful John Cage quote that I'll send to you after we're done, where he talks about an artist in the studio, you know, any kind of creative person in their studio, writer, a visual artist, a musician, whatever, that first of all, you have to get all the critics out of the room, you have to get all your friends out of the room, and then you hopefully you get yourself out of the room, and then the work can be there, right?
Just about. That's a great quote. That is a great quote. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, when I'm thinking about your process, because you're kind of talking about your process and your creative process, how these images kind of live around you. And I see you have some turned back to the wall, and you have some in your drawers, all right, hidden at home, and I imagine in your studio. So is there a lot of time just moving things around, just kind of shifting things? And is it driven by kind of poetry, or is it driven by a kind of visual necessity? Or maybe it's neither, or maybe it's both.
Well, there's a lot of hiding also, you know, of it, you know, in closed drawers and such.
Yes.
But
I don't want to deal with that right now. Let me put that.
I know what you mean. Yes, I do have to. I do have to rearrange the walls, even if I'm not right now. I'm not in terribly productive studio-wise period. You know, I'm doing things that chair of the department has to do, and you know, things at university, and that's fine. That's part of my, you know, cycle. But I'm not in some kind of a particularly productive mode right now, and but I still from time to time have to move stuff around. So today's preparing for this gave me an opportunity to tidy up a little bit and to, you know, to move these around a little bit and take a look at them. So, you know, today the arrangement is different than it's been for a while, and that is good. You know, it's this process of reevaluation of what I've done and conversation with the pieces that's is valuable to me. That's how I think about other pieces.
Oh, and it seems that memory plays an important part of that for you, right? So the memory that you associate with the images comes with those images.
Yes, and you know, memory is memory is one of those things I'm really interested in. It's also one of those big words and big concepts that can encompass, you know, a lot of things. But you know, obviously, because things that divide me are sort of almost kind of like life one, life two, you know, things that kind of create some kind of a continental rift, not unbridgeable, just, you know, continental, you know, rift in my life, you know, my recto and verso, my, you know, gutter of the page, is is coming here, and kind of starting my life. I mean, I didn't know it right away, but kind of starting my life as American,
Mm.
And kind of living in this, it is not, sometimes I will talk to people and they will say, well, well, it seems like you like it here. You stay. It's like, yes, I mean, it has nothing to do with not liking it, and not being aware of interesting things, that have had a chance to happen here because I was here. And it is not about that. It's as Edward Said has said, it's the counterpoint, like a counterpoint in music that you live with.
Yeah.
You're always playing in two, or I would say all of us, several registers. So I am interested in those polyphonies,
Yes.
more than I'm interested in clarity in my work.
Yeah.
Occasionally people are going to tell me, okay, that's all fine and good, but tell us, like, what does this work really mean? And you're so vague talking about your work. I know. I know I'm vague.
If I knew, I would tell you. Yes.
The work, but I can't really help you if there's nothing speaking to you right there. So what is your poetry? When people ask poets, what is your poetry about? Can you explain to us? To a degree, but eventually, there's a reason I have written a poem and not an essay.
Right. Yeah. There's a reason I make visual art, and it isn't encapsulated in words, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you what it means, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Wonderful. So is there something, Tanja, that I haven't asked you about that you think is important to say? I don't want to leave something out that we haven't touched on.
I'm
I
not
got her
sure.
hand.
I'm not
speaker. You just I see your hand up.
I see that Katie has her hand up, and I wonder if our time is up for this conversation.
Oh, we have 5 minutes.
Okay, we have 5 minutes. No, Marian, I just wanted to thank you, for working with me on this and writing your very insightful essay. And I want to thank Katie and Brian and Mark Sloan, who is retiring from, or not retiring, stepping down from leading the Halsey Institute, where I have shown this is the third time, and it's just going back home. And it's family is a tenuous concept, when you for a long time end up. My sister has now moved here to Richmond area, so that is whoa, for the first time in 30 years I'm living close to somebody, from my family.
Get on a plane, right? Yes.
Yeah, exactly. There's no plane, there are no time zones sometimes, and so on and so forth. But the Halsey has been family, so I have loved working with everyone I have worked with there, and it's really great to meet you as well.
Yeah, no, likewise. I think for many of us, Halsey is a home, right?
Yeah.
Someplace we feel comfortable, that we enjoy going. We know we're going to see something interesting. We're going to meet other interesting people there. We owe a lot to Mark Sloan for making.
You're going to have great conversations. You're going to make culture, and that's what. So anyway, I wish you guys well with Halsey Institute, and let me know how I can be part of your successes and how I can help. So
Well, thank you. Definitely thank you to both of you. I have some questions here I want to ask, but I'm blushing on behalf of the Halsey, because we do enjoy being that home for people, and we hope home on many levels. But I've really enjoyed your conversation, and I have so many questions. But I'd like to start with, first, we have a question submitted through Facebook, and I'm going to direct it to both of you to answer. But it's from actually Martha Merritt, a colleague of Tanya's at the University of Richmond. And she says, I'm interested to know if you think that the American South better understands displacement than other parts of the United States, and then in parentheses, that were victorious in the Civil War. So being, all three of us are in the South, and I'm wondering if you have any response to that, if the American South better understands displacement, this issue of displacement.
Good question.
That's a very interesting question. I am not sure that I have an answer for it, but American South somehow I have been living in American South since I've immigrated. I mean, I've been other places here and there, but I've been living in South, in Virginia, then in Florida, then in Virginia again. South has, in many ways, although I have learned so much more about it and about the history of South in this country, and the depth of the tragedy that slavery was, and Civil War, and so on, because you learn about these things in very superficial way in the schools in Europe, and so that was something that I feel affected me. I mean, I live around the corner from the former Lee Monument, now at Marcus Davis Peters Circle, named after a victim of needless police, brutality. And I went to same high school in Sarajevo with that Gavrilo Princip, who shot Ferdinand, the Austrian prince, and that Ivo Andrić, the writer, the Bridge on Drina, went to. And, you can't but keep thinking some thoughts about how did I end up in these two cities that, that have had that have been some kind of a historical pivot. I don't know, Southerners, it is difficult for me to have conversations with Southerners about their lives, their history, and so on, because I always feel like an elephant in a china shop, because I come from Mediterranean culture. We scream at each other, we slam doors, we have a horrible political argument one day, and tomorrow we are drinking together. Again, it's a little bit, at least that's how it used to be in Sarajevo. To go back to your first question, Marian, why don't I go back? Because it's not exactly the same place. It is and it is not. But at any rate, so great question, Martha. I'll be thinking about it, for a long time, but I find that Southerners are polite about asking about war in Bosnia and shy about it. And also, I rarely run into people eager to speak politics, eager to speak history. I mean, of course, my colleagues at University of Richmond and so on, but I'm talking about casual conversations, something that happens on the street, in the bookstore, in the library, something like that. And I find that difficult. I find, and I see that as one of the problems that we have. I mean, how is talking about politics at the Thanksgiving table rude in one of the oldest democracies in the world beats me, but apparently it is. So that is something that sometimes makes me feel really foreign, to be frank. So.
Marian, do you have any reflections on that idea?
Sure. I mean, I'm from Ohio, so you know, I'm not from the South at all, and so it was when I first came to Charleston, it was a culture shock for me. No, I mean, it was a real culture shock. And so I'll say, yeah, so yes, it's different. And I'll say this, the memory lays really heavy here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's different than how I experience
it. Does. It does.
So that's I think that's all I have to, you know, that's how I'd sum it up.
That's a very, that's a beautiful way to, memory lays very heavy.
That's true. And maybe I'm the only native Southerner here in the call. I'm from Virginia originally, and in thinking about the idea, you know, we're talking about home and the South. Yeah, perhaps it is a place where many people have a tenuous relationship with this idea of home, because perhaps it's your home and you love it. You have personal feelings of happiness and warmth being in this place, and parts of it are really beautiful as far as the landscape. And then of course, yes, exactly, that history lays heavy over every step of that beauty. So you have perhaps a shame on feeling shame about this past and trying to feel hopeful about this future. And yeah, maybe that's everything that the Displacements Project is asking about, this idea of home. And, you know, we did explore the South in the Halsey's Southbound exhibition, and therein, even with 56 photographers, there's still so many unanswered questions about what is the South. So I think that's a discussion for another exhibition, another day. I'm sure 50 other exhibitions we could mount. But I want to come back to you two and ask, because unlike Tanja and Marian, unlike many of the other pairings and displacements, you two did not know each other previously. So what was it like meeting through this project, and to talk about a subject so intimate as home, you know, being the foundation upon which now your relationship can be built? What was that like?
I can start. I mean, because it was kind of, we had a kind of immediate two things that we shared. One is, I've been to Sarajevo, I've been to Bosnia and Herzegovina, so I've seen it. You know, I've experienced it even just a little bit. Mm-hmm. But the second thing, of course, is also, of course, the Dayton Accords. And so what solved the problem to some degree, the Yugoslav wars, what ended the Yugoslav wars anyway, was the Dayton Agreement. And so the agreement between the former Yugoslav republics was finalized under President Carter, and the agreements were signed in Dayton, Ohio. And so they're called the Dayton Accords.
Clinton.
Dayton, yes.
Yeah, Clinton, you said Carter.
Oh, Clinton. Oh, thank you. Yes, you're right. Clinton, absolutely. A C, I agree.
Yeah, C, yeah.
Clinton.
From the South, yeah, Democrat, whatever.
Hillary's husband, yes.
Yes.
And so, and of course, my hometown is Dayton. My father's from Dayton, Ohio. A lot of my family still lives there. And so I'm always, you know, it always strikes me when I talk to any former Yugoslav, they talk to me about the Dayton Accords, and I say, oh yeah, I know that place, right?
Yeah. There are lots of cafes and, you know, the kebab shops in Sarajevo that are, and I'm sure throughout Bosnia, that are named Dayton.
Dayton, right, exactly.
Yeah, and so, yeah.
It's the only place, you know, the only thing that Dayton has besides the Wright brothers is now.
That is right, the Wright brothers, and Yeah, you were saying that ended the wars. Basically, Dayton Peace Accord is something that basically stopped the hemorrhage.
Yes.
It was a very strange peace accord, which basically awarded the aggressors most of everything they've wanted, and kind of left the wound open, and set the seeds for. But unfortunately, these peace accords, as I've had a chance to really kind of learn, intimately, following very closely, obviously, what was happening at that time, they have to do with cycles, presidential and other election cycles. The victories have to be scored on a schedule. The achievable things can be, and those are countries far away, and there's very little thinking about what is going to, yes, but what is this going to, what kind of seeds are we planting for the future? Are these right seeds?
And how will they
sustainable? Is this piece sustainable? And we've seen what happened. Bosnia isn't divided into two entities, and small enough as it is, and then in this situation of political stalemate between NATO and European Union on one hand, and Serbia backed by Russians, on the other hand. So, and of course, a great loss of that diversity, that kind of an easy way of us living together that once existed.
Right. There was the Bosnia and Herzegovina had an incredible mix of kind of cultures and religions and historical layers.
Yeah, and it still does, to be to be sure, but it is sorely tested. When I was growing up in socialist Yugoslavia, there were no schools but public schools. If you were going to school, you were going to public school, and you were going to school according to where you lived. So both ethnically and sort of class-wise, because you still have economic classes, in the socialism, not quite as obscenely spread over part of population that's food insecure, and then part of population that doesn't really know what to do with all that money. We were all in schools together. Now Croat kids tend to go to Catholic schools. Serbian kids tend to go to Orthodox, schools, and public schools are, mostly Muslim kids only. So they don't even have a chance to be growing up together, which is unthinkable as a concept, to me.
Right. So we had lots to talk about, Katie, to answer your
I know. I mean, really, I hate that I have to draw the event to a close, but I'm happy to end having us learn about the homes that others, how others exist in other homes across space and many time zones. And perhaps we'll all be Googling tonight to fill in the gaps of history that we are missing. So thank you both for providing that, as well as for talking about the work. And this has been so great. But thank you to everybody for watching. And tonight's talk between Tanja Softić and Dr. Marian Mazzone is one in a series of many conversations that will take place over the remainder of 2020. And I hope that you'll join us on Tuesday evening, October 27th at 7 p.m. We'll be having a live screening of Hamid Rahmanian's film version of Feathers of Fire, a dazzling shadow puppet play based on the Persian epic Shahnameh. To attend the screening, please RSVP to Brian Granger at grangerbw@cofc.edu. This email may be found on both the Halsey and Displacements websites. And in the meantime, visit displacements.org to experience the exhibition, put those upcoming events on your calendar, and see Tanja's work and read Marian's response to that work. And thank you again so much for your time this evening, Tanja and Marian.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, and thank you, Marian.
Oh, thank you, Tanja. It was a blast talking with you.